In the glittering world of the wealthy elite, appearances define power, and cruelty often masquerades as sophistication. At an exclusive restaurant, Victoria Harrington thrived on reminding others of their place. When she spotted Alicia Carter, a poised black woman in a flowing blue dress, she saw an intruder, someone to humiliate. One slap, sharp and public, was meant to put Alicia back in her place. What Victoria didn't know was that Alicia was no ordinary guest. She was the wife of billionaire David Carter. Within minutes, reputations, marriages, and an empire began to unravel. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The soft glow of crystal chandeliers filled LeClaire's dining room as Alicia Carter and her friend Naomi Brooks stepped through the polished wooden doors. The hostess's eyes widened slightly at Alicia's striking blue dress, a designer piece that flowed like water with each graceful movement. "Good evening, ladies," the hostess said, her smile genuine, but her eyes darting between them and the other patrons. "Your table is ready." As they followed her through the maze of white-clothed tables, Alicia felt the familiar weight of stares on her back, some quick and furtive, others lingering and less subtle. She kept her chin high, her steps measured and confident. "Ignore them," Naomi whispered, her voice carrying a protective edge. "They're just jealous they don't look half as good as you do." Alicia smiled, but said nothing. Years of navigating these spaces had taught her that silence often spoke louder than words. Their table was perfectly positioned near the center of the restaurant, close to where Victoria Harrington held court, with her usual crowd of socialites. The waiter approached with professional charm. "Welcome to LeClaire's. May I start you ladies with our wine selection?" "The Chateau Margaux, please," Alicia said, her voice smooth and cultured. She noticed Victoria's head turn slightly at the mention of the expensive wine. Minutes later, the waiter returned with 2 bottles of the same wine. In a moment of confusion, he hesitated between the tables. Victoria's sharp voice cut through the ambient chatter. "That's our wine," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "I'm sure these ladies ordered something more suitable to their taste." The waiter quickly corrected his mistake, but Victoria wasn't finished. Her voice grew louder, clearly meant to carry. "It's getting impossible to enjoy a proper dinner these days. People just don't know their place anymore." Alicia kept her eyes on the menu, her expression neutral despite the heat rising in her chest. She'd learned long ago that maintaining dignity was its own form of power. "Really?" Naomi's voice carried equal parts silk and steel. "And what place would that be exactly?" Victoria's face tightened with anger. She stood up, her expensive jewelry catching the light as she gestured dramatically. "Well, isn't it obvious? This isn't some common diner. You can't just walk in here wearing a fancy dress and pretend you belong." The surrounding conversations died down as other diners turned to watch. Alicia could see phones being quietly raised, their camera lenses catching the unfolding scene. "The only person making a scene here is you," Naomi shot back, her PR instincts kicking in. "Maybe you should focus on your own dinner instead of policing others." Victoria's face flushed red. She pushed back her chair with a screech and stormed toward their table. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor like angry punctuation marks. "How dare you speak to me that way?" Victoria's voice trembled with rage. "Do you have any idea who I am? I've been coming here for 20 years. I serve on the boards of half the charities in Manhattan. I won't be lectured by someone who's clearly trying to take things that don't belong to her." Alicia finally looked up, meeting Victoria's gaze with calm strength. "Mrs. Harrington, I suggest you return to your table. You're embarrassing yourself." The fact that Alicia knew her name seemed to push Victoria over the edge. Her perfectly manicured hand shot out fast as a snake, connecting with Alicia's cheek in a sharp crack that echoed through the now silent restaurant. Time seemed to freeze. Alicia's face burned where Victoria's hand had struck, but she didn't move, didn't cry out. She kept her posture straight, her dignity intact, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. The restaurant had gone completely still. Forks stopped midway to mouths. Glasses hung suspended between table and lips. Dozens of phones were now raised, recording everything. Victoria stood there, her hand still raised, her face a mixture of triumph and growing uncertainty, as Alicia didn't react the way she'd expected. No tears, no shouting, no running away in shame, just that same calm, steady gaze that seemed to look right through her. The silence stretched out, becoming its own kind of power. It was the kind of silence that marked a turning point, the moment before everything changed. Victoria's hand slowly lowered, and something flickered in her eyes. The first hint of doubt, of recognition that perhaps she had made a terrible mistake. Naomi had half risen from her chair, her face a mask of shocked fury, but Alicia placed a gentle hand on her friend's arm. The touch said everything. Wait. Watch. This moment belongs to me. The matron was hurrying over, his face pale with concern. Waiters hovered uncertainly at the edges of the scene, while the other diners remained frozen in place, unwitting audience members to this unexpected drama in their midst. Through it all, Alicia remained seated, her posture perfect, her blue dress settling around her like a royal robe. The red mark on her cheek stood out stark against her skin, but her eyes never wavered from Victoria's face. She didn't need to speak. Her silence was deafening, and in it, Victoria's actions echoed back at her with devastating clarity. Naomi exploded from her chair, her voice cutting through the tense silence. How dare you put your hands on her? Who do you think you are? I know exactly who I am, Victoria sneered, though her hand trembled slightly at her side. The real question is, who does she think she is? Coming in here, ordering expensive wine, acting like she belongs? The matron, Marcus, rushed forward with several staff members close behind. His usual polished demeanor showed cracks of genuine distress. Mrs. Harrington, please, let's not— No, Marcus, Victoria cut him off, her voice rising higher. I won't stand for this. This woman is clearly trespassing. Look at her, trying to play dress-up in that blue dress. She probably snuck in through the kitchen. Alicia's hand dropped slowly from her cheek to rest in her lap. Her fingers smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her dress, the movement deliberate and graceful. The contrast between her calm and Victoria's growing hysteria was striking. Mrs. Harrington, Marcus tried again. I must insist. Call security, Victoria demanded, jabbing a bejeweled finger toward Alicia. I want her removed immediately. I've been coming here for decades. I know every member of the board. When Richard hears about this— Ma'am, a young waiter interrupted, his voice shaking slightly. You don't understand. That's Mrs. Carter. Victoria's lip curled. Carter? Am I supposed to know that name? The restaurant's general manager, James Peterson, appeared at Marcus's side. His face had gone pale and sweat beaded on his forehead. Mrs. Harrington, this is Mrs. Alicia Carter. She's the wife of David Carter. David Carter? Victoria's voice held a note of uncertainty. The owner of Leclerc's, James continued, his words coming faster now. And the entire Carter Hospitality Group, this restaurant, along with 30 others across the country, belongs to her husband. The color drained from Victoria's face. Her mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish suddenly finding itself on dry land. Around them, the whispers began, spreading from table to table like wildfire. Did she really just slap David Carter's wife? The billionaire. Oh my God, Look at her face. Someone send me that video. Naomi leaned forward, her voice low but carrying clearly in the hushed restaurant. You just slapped the queen of the house. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand flew to her throat, clutching at her pearl necklace. The same hand that had just committed what was quickly becoming a career-ending social faux pas. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the forest of phones, still recording her every move. I didn't, she stammered, backing away from the table. Her heel caught on the plush carpet, making her stumble slightly. This is all a misunderstanding. I didn't know. That I belonged here? Alicia spoke for the first time since the slap, her voice steady and clear. Or that I could afford to be here. Or that I had every right to be here. Each question landed like a gentle tap on crystal, ringing with truth. The manager stepped forward again, his face set in professional lines, but his eyes hard. Mrs. Harrington, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. Leave? Victoria's voice rose an octave. But I'm meeting the Astors in 20 minutes. We're discussing the Children's Hospital fundraiser. I'm afraid that meeting will need to be rescheduled, James said firmly. Somewhere else. Victoria's face contorted with desperate anger. She fumbled in her designer handbag, pulling out her phone. This is ridiculous. I'm calling Richard. He'll sort this out. We have contracts with... Mrs. Harrington, Marcus interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. Please, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Allow me to escort you out. The whispers had grown louder now, phones following Victoria's every movement. The mighty socialite's fall from grace was being documented in real time, and everyone knew it. Years of carefully cultivated social status were crumbling around her like a sandcastle at high tide. Alicia remained seated, her posture perfect, as if this were just another dinner party. But her eyes never left Victoria's face, watching as the older woman's world shifted beneath her feet. The red mark on her cheek had begun to fade, but the impact of what had happened would last far longer than any physical evidence. This isn't over, Victoria hissed, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. She allowed Marcus to guide her toward the exit, her steps unsteady despite her expensive heels. As Victoria disappeared through the front doors, the remaining diners burst into animated conversation. Phones buzzed with notifications as videos began circulating. The sound of Victoria's slap would soon echo far beyond the walls of Leclerc's. Naomi finally sat back down, her hands still shaking with anger. Are you okay? She asked softly, reaching across the table to touch Alicia's hand. I'm fine, Alicia replied, her voice steady. She adjusted the napkin in her lap, with the same quiet grace she'd shown throughout the entire confrontation. Though I think our evening just got more interesting than we planned. The heavy glass doors of Leclerc's swung open, and David Carter strode in, his presence commanding immediate attention. At 6'2", dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, he moved with the controlled power of someone used to being in charge. 2 security men in dark suits flanked him, their earpieces gleaming under the restaurant's crystal chandeliers. The dining room fell into a new kind of silence. Phones that had been recording Victoria's meltdown now swiveled to capture David's entrance. Diners leaned close to whisper to their companions. That's David Carter himself. The billionaire. He looks furious. Victoria had been arguing with the manager near the coat check, her voice growing increasingly shrill. At David's entrance, she straightened her spine and smoothed her designer dress, years of social training kicking in. The tremor in her hands betrayed her nervousness as she watched him approach. David's eyes found Alicia first. He took in the redness on her cheek, and his jaw tightened. When he turned to Victoria, his expression was arctic. Mr. Carter. Victoria stepped forward, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding. If we could just... A misunderstanding? David's voice was quiet, but carried across the silent restaurant. My wife was physically assaulted in my restaurant, and you're calling it a misunderstanding? Victoria's smile faltered. You don't understand. She was being provocative, ordering expensive wine, acting… Well, she gestured vaguely with her manicured hands. Acting like what, Mrs. Harrington? David's words cut through her, stammering like a knife. Like someone who belongs here? Like my wife, who quite literally does own this table you're standing next to. I didn't know who she was, Victoria protested, her voice rising. She never said, so it would have been acceptable to slap her if she wasn't my wife. David took a step closer, and Victoria instinctively backed up. Is that what you're suggesting? No, of course not. But she provoked me. Ask anyone. Victoria looked desperately around the room, seeking support. The other diners suddenly found their plates fascinating. Naomi stood up, her eyes blazing. The only thing Alicia did was exist in the same space as you, Mrs. Harrington. We were having a quiet dinner until you decided to make assumptions and act on your prejudices. Victoria's face flushed red. How dare you? I've been coming to Leclerc's for 20 years. I know everyone here. Richard and I have contracts worth millions with… Had contracts, David corrected her. His voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the calm. As of this moment, Mrs. Harrington, you and your husband are banned from every Carter Hospitality Group property. Every restaurant, every hotel, every venue. Victoria's mouth fell open. You can't. I can, and I am. David turned to address James, the manager. Make sure this is implemented immediately. System-wide ban, effective now. Yes, sir, James nodded, already pulling out his tablet. Furthermore, David continued, I'll be personally reviewing every contract and business dealing we have with Harrington Development. I imagine Richard will be quite interested to learn how you've impacted his business relationships tonight. Victoria's composure cracked completely. She fumbled for her phone, hands shaking so badly she could barely dial. Richard? Richard, you need to come now. It's all falling apart. David Carter is here, and he's saying things. No, he doesn't mean it. He can't mean it. The contracts. Richard, please. Her voice grew more desperate as she listened to whatever her husband was saying. Around her, phones continued to record every moment of her unraveling. Alicia finally stood, smoothing her blue dress. She moved to David's side with the same quiet grace she'd maintained throughout the evening. David's expression softened as he looked at her, his hand gently touching her cheek where Victoria had struck her. Are you okay? He asked softly. Alicia nodded, leaning slightly into his touch. I am now. Victoria was still clutching her phone, watching them with a mix of horror and disbelief. The reality of what she'd done, and to whom she'd done it, seemed to finally be sinking in. Please, she tried one last time, her voice barely above a whisper. We can work this out. The hospital fundraiser next week, the children's wing that bears our name. I suggest, David said, wrapping a protective arm around Alicia's waist, that you contact your lawyers in the morning. You're going to need them. He leaned down to whisper in Alicia's ear, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. She will regret every second of this. Marcus stepped forward, gesturing to the security team that had accompanied David. Mrs. Harrington, your coat is ready. Please allow us to escort you out. Victoria looked around one last time, desperately seeking any ally in the room. But the other diners who had fawned over her just an hour ago now watched her with a mixture of disgust and fascination, their phones still recording her downfall. The security team moved to either side of her, not touching her, but making it clear she had no choice. Victoria's shoulders slumped as the fight finally left her. With faltering steps, she allowed herself to be led toward the exit, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor in the otherwise silent restaurant. As she reached the door, someone at a nearby table whispered, just loud enough to be heard, "How the mighty fall." The heavy glass doors swung shut behind Victoria Harrington, but the cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of her disgrace for the world to see. Victoria's hands shook as she fumbled with her keycard in the private elevator of her Central Park West penthouse. The gold-plated walls that usually made her feel superior now seemed to mock her, reflecting her disheveled appearance from every angle. Her carefully styled hair had come loose, and her mascara had smudged from frustrated tears she'd shed in the car. The elevator dinged, opening to their sprawling 8,000-square-foot penthouse. Richard stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, still in his business suit, a glass of scotch in his hand. He didn't turn to look at her. "You've really done it this time, Victoria." His voice was cold, controlled, the tone he used when dealing with failed business ventures. He pressed a button on a remote, and their massive wall-mounted TV came to life. Victoria's stomach churned as she saw herself on the screen, her arm raised, the sound of the slap echoing through their marble-floored living room. The footage was crystal clear, captured from multiple angles by the restaurant's patrons. "Trending on Twitter," Richard said, finally turning to face her. His face was flushed with anger. "Top story on every local news channel. The Carter's PR team is already releasing statements." "Richard, Shut up!" He slammed his glass down on the Italian marble counter. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Those contracts with Carter Hospitality Group are worth hundreds of millions. Years of careful negotiation destroyed because you couldn't control yourself." Victoria sank onto their white leather sofa, her legs giving out. She was being insolent. You should have seen the way she looked at me, like she owned the place. "She did own the place," Richard roared, making Victoria flinch. "Her husband owns the entire damn chain. What were you thinking?" "How was I supposed to know?" Victoria's voice rose defensively. "These people don't usually." "These people?" Richard cut her off. "These people? David Carter is worth more than triple what we are. He's on the cover of Forbes. His wife has degrees from Harvard and Yale. And you just slapped her in public because what? She ordered the wrong wine?" Victoria stood up, pacing the room in agitation. "I'll apologize. We'll make it right." "It's far too late for that." Richard pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages. "The video has over 2 million views already. Manhattan Slap is trending nationwide. Civil rights groups are calling for boycotts of all Harrington properties." On the TV, a news anchor's voice filled the room. "In what's being called the Slap of Manhattan, socialite Victoria Harrington was caught on camera assaulting Alicia Carter, wife of billionaire CEO David Carter, in an apparently racially motivated attack." "It wasn't racial!" Victoria shrieked at the TV. "I didn't know who she was." "That makes it worse," Richard snapped. He pressed buttons on his phone rapidly. "I'm calling Jerome at Mitchell & Associates. We need their PR team working on this immediately. And get Marcus from legal on the line." Victoria watched as her husband made call after call, his voice growing increasingly tense. She could hear fragments of conversations. "Full damage control, whatever it costs. Need this contained?" The TV continued its relentless coverage. Different angles of the slap played on repeat. Social media reactions scrolled across the screen. Disgusting display of privilege. "Lock her up. Time to cancel the Harringtons." "They can't do this to us," Victoria whispered, more to herself than Richard. "We're the Harringtons. We've been in Manhattan society for generations." Richard ignored her, speaking into his phone. "Yes, call in every favor we have with the media. I want alternative narratives running by morning. Paint Carter as aggressive, his wife as provocative. Anything to muddy the waters." On screen, a panel of commentators dissected the incident. "The body language here is telling," one said. "Mrs. Harrington clearly approaches with premeditated intent. The look on her face," another added. "Pure contempt. This is what systemic racism looks like in action, folks." Victoria grabbed a crystal glass from the bar cart and hurled it at the massive TV screen. It shattered against the protective coating, leaving spiderweb cracks across the corner, but failing to silence the continuing commentary. "Damn it, Victoria," Richard shouted. "Control yourself. This is exactly the kind of behavior that got us into this mess." "I won't let them destroy us," Victoria declared, her voice trembling with rage and fear. "I won't let that woman and her husband take everything we've built." Richard's phone buzzed again. His face darkened as he read the message. "The Metropolitan Museum is reconsidering our sponsorship of the Spring Gala. The Children's Hospital Board wants an emergency meeting about the naming rights to the wing." Victoria collapsed back onto the sofa, her designer dress crumpling beneath her. The TV continued its merciless broadcast, her moment of rage playing over and over in an endless loop. Each replay seemed to chip away at the carefully constructed facade of superiority she'd maintained her entire life. "We'll bury her," she said suddenly, sitting up straighter. "Everyone has secrets. We'll find hers. Make her sorry she ever crossed paths with me." Richard looked at his wife, a mix of disgust and resignation on his face. "You still don't get it, do you? We're not the ones with the power anymore. You saw to that with one stupid, impulsive act." The news coverage switched to footage of David Carter leading Alicia out of the restaurant, his protective stance and her dignified composure creating a stark contrast to Victoria's earlier display of violence. "This isn't over," Victoria insisted, her manicured nails digging into the leather of the sofa. "I won't let it be over." Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Alicia and David's Upper East Side penthouse. Alicia blinked awake, her cheek still tender from the previous night's assault. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the nightstand, lighting up with an endless stream of notifications. "Honey?" David's voice came from their ensuite bathroom. "Naomi's called 6 times already." Alicia reached for her phone, overwhelmed by the flood of messages, missed calls, and social media alerts. Her Instagram following had jumped by hundreds of thousands overnight. News outlets from across the country were requesting interviews. Even her old law school friends were checking in. "This is insane," she muttered, scrolling through the notifications. Her fingers paused over a text from Naomi. "Girl, we need to get ahead of this. Call me ASAP." David emerged from the bathroom, already dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit. He sat on the edge of their king-sized bed, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "How are you feeling?" "Overwhelmed," Alicia admitted, letting her phone drop onto the silk bedsheets. "Everyone wants a statement, a reaction, an interview." She ran her fingers through her hair, still perfectly styled from the night before. "Naomi thinks we should strike while the iron is hot. And what do you think?" David's voice was soft, supportive. "I think—" Alicia stood up, walking to their bedroom window that overlooked Central Park. "I think dignity speaks louder than chaos." Her phone buzzed again, another message from Naomi. "Have you seen what that witch Victoria is saying about you? We need to respond." Alicia opened her social media apps and her stomach dropped. Victoria's PR machine was already in full swing. Anonymous sources quoted in tabloid articles described Alicia as notoriously difficult and regularly rude to restaurant staff. Comment sections were filling with trolls questioning her character, her background, even her marriage to David. "Look at this," she showed David her phone. "They're trying to paint me as the aggressor." David's jaw tightened as he read the comments. "We can shut this down with one phone call. Say the word, and I'll have our PR team destroy them." Alicia shook her head. "That's what they want. to drag me into the mud with them. She walked to their expansive closet, where the blue dress from the previous night hung carefully pressed. Her fingers traced the delicate fabric. They want me to lose my composure, to prove their narrative right. Her phone rang again, Naomi's face lighting up the screen. This time, Alicia answered. "Finally!" Naomi's voice burst through the speaker. "Have you seen what they're doing? We need to fight back." "Good morning to you, too," Alicia said calmly, putting the phone on speaker. "Don't good morning me. Victoria's team is spreading lies faster than a wildfire. They're saying you provoked her, that you have a history of causing scenes. Some trash blog is even questioning your Harvard law degree." David moved closer to the phone. "Morning, Naomi. We're handling it." "Handling it?" Naomi's voice rose an octave. "With all due respect, David, silence isn't handling it. They're controlling the narrative." Alicia sat at her vanity, studying her reflection. The mark from Victoria's slap had faded, but the memory burned bright. "Let them talk," she said firmly. "Let them show the world exactly who they are." "Alicia," Naomi's voice softened, "I know you want to take the high road, but sometimes you have to fight fire with fire." More notifications popped up on Alicia's phone. Someone had dug up photos of her from college, trying to paint her as a party girl. Twitter was ablaze with competing hashtags. "Justice for Alicia, fighting against John Harrington Truth." "The truth is, in that video," Alicia said, standing up. "Everyone saw what happened. Everyone saw who threw the first punch. Literally." David wrapped his arms around her from behind, both of them reflected in the vanity mirror. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." Naomi sighed through the phone. "At least let me release a statement condemning the false allegations. We can't let them assassinate your character like this." Alicia walked back to the closet, pulling out the blue dress. She held it up, remembering how confident she'd felt in it just yesterday, before everything changed. The dress that had made her feel beautiful had become a symbol of something larger. "You know what bothers them the most?" she said, running her hands over the fabric. "That I didn't break. That I didn't scream or fight back. That I stood there with my dignity intact while Victoria showed the world exactly who she is." "But," Naomi started to protest. "No buts," Alicia cut her off, her voice firm but gentle. "They want me to be angry. They're waiting for me to lash out, to give them ammunition. But I won't give them that satisfaction." She walked to her full-length mirror, holding the blue dress against herself. In the reflection, she saw more than just her own image. She saw every woman who'd ever been told they didn't belong, every person who'd been judged by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. "They think silence means weakness," Alicia whispered, meeting her own eyes in the mirror. "They think they can bait me into becoming what they want me to be." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "They think they can silence me. They're wrong." Alicia sat in the green room of the National Morning Show, adjusting her blue dress, the same one from that fateful night. She'd chosen to wear it deliberately, turning Victoria's attempt to humiliate her into a symbol of strength. "3 minutes until we're live," a production assistant called out. David squeezed her hand. "You've got this, honey." "Remember," Naomi said, touching up Alicia's makeup, "Marcus Green is fair. He's known for letting people tell their stories without twisting them." Alicia nodded, taking a deep breath. After days of silence, she'd finally agreed to this one interview, not with a tabloid or gossip show, but with Marcus Green, a respected journalist known for his integrity. "Mrs. Carter?" Marcus appeared in the doorway, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Are you ready?" The studio lights were bright, but not harsh. Alicia settled into the comfortable armchair across from Marcus as the crew made final adjustments. David and Naomi watched from behind the cameras, giving her encouraging smiles. "Going live in 5, 4, 3. The director counted down silently with his fingers. "Good morning, America," Marcus began, his voice warm and professional. "Today we're joined by Alicia Carter, whose encounter at Leclerc's restaurant has sparked a national conversation about privilege, dignity, and racism in America's elite spaces." The cameras turned to Alicia, who sat straight-backed but relaxed, channeling years of courtroom experience. "Mrs. Carter, thank you for being here," Marcus said. "You've been silent since the incident. Why speak now?" Alicia's voice was clear and steady. "Because silence can be misinterpreted, Marcus. While I believe in choosing dignity over chaos, I also believe in standing up for truth." "The video has been viewed millions of times," Marcus noted. "What was going through your mind in that moment?" "Honestly?" Alicia paused, her eyes reflecting both strength and vulnerability. "I thought about my mother. She always told me that true class isn't about what you wear or where you dine. It's about how you treat others, especially in difficult moments." Behind the cameras, Naomi wiped away a tear. David stood rigid, protective, watching every moment. "Mrs. Harrington's team has suggested there was more to the story," Marcus pressed gently. "There is more to the story," Alicia agreed, surprising him. "There's generations of people being told they don't belong. There's countless moments where women who look like me have been judged, not by their character or achievements, but by assumptions about who they are and where they came from." The studio grew completely silent. Even the crew transfixed. "I'm a Harvard-educated attorney. I've worked in boardrooms and courtrooms. I'm married to a brilliant businessman. But none of that should matter," Alicia continued, her voice gaining passion but never losing control. "No one deserves to be humiliated for existing in a space others think they don't belong in." Social media exploded in real time. "Alicia Speaks" started trending within minutes. "You're wearing the same dress," Marcus observed. Alicia smiled. "This dress was supposed to be about a nice dinner with my friend. Now it's armor. Every woman who's ever been told she doesn't belong, this is for them." In living rooms across America, people leaned forward in their chairs. Senior citizens called radio stations, praising Her Grace. "That's a real lady," one elderly caller said. "She showed us what class really means." "What would you say to Mrs. Harrington if she were watching?" Marcus asked. "I would say that hate is heavy. It weighs you down. But dignity?" Alicia's voice grew stronger. "Dignity lifts you up. It carries you through the storm. And I hope she learns that true power isn't in how hard you can slap someone down. It's in how tall you can stand when others try to diminish you." The interview continued with Marcus asking about her background, her work with youth education programs, her vision for change. Throughout it all, Alicia remained poised, articulate, and unwaveringly authentic. Across town, in her luxurious Upper East Side penthouse, Victoria Harrington watched the interview with growing rage. She paced in front of her massive television, a crystal wine glass clutched in her manicured hand. "How dare she?" Victoria seethed, as Alicia's composed words resonated with viewer after viewer. The morning show's social media feeds were flooding with support for Alicia. Even Victoria's usual society friends were sending subtle signals of distancing themselves. "Look at her, acting so noble," Victoria spat, watching Alicia describe her charitable work with inner-city schools. "Playing the victim when she's married to a billionaire." On screen, Alicia was saying, "Money doesn't shield you from prejudice. Sometimes it just makes the target bigger, the assumptions more vicious." Victoria's hand tightened around her wine glass as the comments scroll showed overwhelming support for Alicia. "Perfect little princess," she hissed. "You think you've won?" The interview reached its conclusion, with Marcus thanking Alicia for her candor and courage. The final shot showed Alicia's serene smile, the blue dress catching the studio lights perfectly. With a scream of fury, Victoria hurled her wineglass at the wall. It shattered spectacularly, leaving a red stain like a wound on the expensive wallpaper. Crimson wine dripped down the wall as Victoria stood breathing heavily, her perfectly curated world crumbling around her. The TV continued to play, showing social media reactions pouring in. Celebrities, politicians, and ordinary citizens were all sharing the interview, praising Alicia's grace under pressure. The hashtag #JohnDignityWins had taken over Twitter, accompanied by photos of the blue dress. Victoria grabbed her phone, furiously scrolling through the responses. Each supportive comment, each shared clip of Alicia's poised responses felt like another slap. But this time, Victoria was the one being humiliated in public. In a sleek Manhattan office with floor-to-ceiling windows, Victoria and Richard Harrington sat across from their PR team. The conference room buzzed with tension as PowerPoint slides displayed the mounting damage to their reputation. "The interview was devastating," said Sarah Chen, their lead PR strategist. "Social media sentiment is running 90% in Alicia Carter's favor. We need to change the narrative immediately." Richard's jaw clenched. "Then change it. That's what we're paying you millions for." "We need something concrete," Sarah replied, tapping her tablet. "Something that undermines her perfect image. Everyone loves a fallen angel story." Victoria leaned forward, her designer suit impeccable despite her obvious strain. "There has to be something. Nobody's that clean." "We've already got our best investigators working on it," Richard said, his voice cold with determination. "Every school she attended, every job she held, every connection she's ever had, dig deeper." Sarah nodded to her team. "We'll need to be careful about how we release anything we find. The public's sympathetic to her right now. If we appear too aggressive, it could backfire." "I don't care about appearing aggressive," Victoria snapped. "I want her destroyed." The meeting continued for hours, strategizing ways to shift public opinion. Richard made calls to his network of private investigators, authorizing unlimited resources for the search into Alicia's past. That evening, the Metropolitan Museum of Art glowed with warmth as New York's elite gathered for the annual Children's Education Foundation Gala. Alicia and David arrived to flashbulbs and supportive cheers from the crowd gathered outside. Alicia wore a stunning emerald gown, her head held high as she walked the red carpet with David. Society photographers called their names, desperate for shots of Manhattan's most talked-about couple. "Mrs. Carter, how are you handling the publicity?" a reporter called out. Alicia smiled gracefully. "By focusing on what matters. Tonight's about raising money for children's education." Inside the museum's grand hall, wealthy donors and celebrities mingled among priceless artifacts. Alicia noticed some of Victoria's usual social circle giving her wide berth, but many others approached with words of support. "What you said in that interview was so powerful," said an elderly philanthropist, squeezing Alicia's hand. "My granddaughter watched it 3 times." In a darker corner of the hall, James Morton, a longtime Harrington ally and real estate developer, huddled with several journalists. His voice was low, conspiratorial. "Have you looked into her family background?" he asked, sliding a manila envelope to a hungry-looking reporter. "Interesting stuff about her father. Real interesting." The reporter's eyes lit up as she peeked inside. "How verified is this?" "Rock solid," Morton smiled. "Public records. Court documents. The kind of story that writes itself." Across the room, David noticed the whispered conversation but kept his focus on Alicia. They moved through the crowd together, the picture of grace and success. Several major donors privately pledged support for their educational initiatives, a clear sign that the Harringtons' influence was waning. "You're glowing tonight," David whispered to Alicia during a quiet moment. "I feel strong," she replied, squeezing his hand. Like we're finally breaking through. Neither noticed the reporters slipping away from Morton, phones already out as they called their editors. The gala continued late into the night. Alicia and David danced, laughed with supporters, and helped raise record donations for the foundation. It felt like a victory lap after the interview's success. But in newsrooms across the city, editors were already preparing tomorrow's stories. Fingers flew across keyboards as reporters chased down leads about Lawrence Thompson, Alicia's estranged father, and his conviction for investment fraud 15 years ago. The next morning, Alicia woke to her phone buzzing frantically. Naomi's name flashed on the screen. "Have you seen the news?" Naomi's voice was tight with concern. Alicia reached for her tablet, and her heart sank. The headlines screamed across every major news site. Carter's hidden past. Socialite's father behind million-dollar fraud. Like father? Like daughter? Questions arise about Alicia Carter's family. Exclusive. The criminal history behind Manhattan's new it couple. Photos of her father's old mugshot were everywhere, alongside pictures of her in the blue dress. Comment sections filled with people questioning everything about her character, suggesting she'd hidden her background to infiltrate high society. "They're trying to paint me as a fraud," Alicia said quietly, sitting up in bed. David stirred beside her, immediately alert at her tone. "What is it?" he asked, reaching for his own phone. Alicia handed him the tablet, her hands steady despite the shock. The story she'd tried to leave behind, the pain she'd worked so hard to overcome, was now splashed across every screen in America. The articles dug deep. Her father's crimes, the families he'd hurt, her mother's struggle to raise her alone after his conviction. They quoted anonymous sources, suggesting she'd deliberately hidden her background to marry into wealth. David's face darkened as he read. "The Harringtons," he growled. "They're behind this." Alicia stood and walked to their bedroom window, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. The same city that had cheered her bravery yesterday was now feasting on her pain. "They think this will break me," she said, her voice gaining strength. "They think my father's mistakes define who I am." "We'll fight back," David said, already dialing their PR team. "No," Alicia turned to face him, her expression resolute. "We'll do something better. We'll tell the truth. All of it. My way." Camera flashes exploded like lightning outside the Carters' Upper East Side townhouse. A wall of reporters pressed against the security barriers, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Alicia stood at the top of the steps, her cream-colored blazer a stark contrast against the dark wood door behind her. "Mrs. Carter, did you deliberately hide your father's criminal past? Was your marriage to David Carter part of a long-term con? Have you spoken to your father since his release?" The questions hit like physical blows, but Alicia maintained her composure. Security guards flanked her on both sides as reporters shouted over each other. "I'll make a brief statement," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the chaos. "Yes, my father made terrible mistakes 15 years ago. He committed crimes that hurt people, and he served his time. I've never hidden this fact, but I chose not to let his actions define my life." More questions erupted, but Alicia raised her hand. "That's all I'll say for now. Thank you." She turned and walked back inside, her heels clicking against marble as the heavy door shut behind her. The moment she was out of public view, her shoulders slumped. She made it halfway to her private study before the tears started. Inside the study, Alicia collapsed onto the leather sofa, her carefully maintained facade crumbling. Years of memories flooded back. The shame of watching her father led away in handcuffs, the whispers at school, her mother working 3 jobs to keep them afloat. "I worked so hard," she whispered to the empty room. "So hard to build something different." David found her there 10 minutes later, still crying. He sat beside her, pulling her close. Hey! Look at me. Alicia wiped her eyes, smearing expensive mascara. They're making it sound like I'm just like him. Like everything I've achieved is some kind of scam. You're nothing like him, David said firmly. You're the woman who worked her way through law school, who chose to leave a six-figure salary to run our foundation, who's helped thousands of kids get educational opportunities. But the media will print whatever sells papers, David interrupted. But the truth is stronger. You've never lied about your past. You've just refused to let it chain you down. Alicia's phone buzzed. Naomi's face appeared on the screen as she initiated a video call. Alicia answered, trying to compose herself. "Girl, these vultures are out for blood," Naomi said, her face tight with concern. "We need to hit back harder. Release everything we have on the Harringtons now." "I don't know," Alicia said quietly. "Maybe I should just stay quiet until it blows over." "That's exactly what they want." Naomi's voice rose with passion. "They're counting on you hiding, so they can control the narrative. Don't give them that power." Across town, in the Harringtons' penthouse, Richard poured himself a celebratory scotch. Victoria sat by the window, watching news coverage of Alicia's statement with obvious satisfaction. "Look at her squirm," Victoria smirked, sipping champagne. "Not so perfect now, is she?" Richard loosened his tie, settling into his leather armchair. "The Carters are finally bleeding. Their stock dropped 8 points this morning. Investors hate scandal." "Will it be enough?" Victoria asked. "To save our contracts?" "It's a start," Richard replied. "We've got more coming. Wait until the press finds out about her father's cellmate's connection to organized crime. The implications alone will destroy their reputation." Victoria laughed, but it held an edge of desperation. "I want to see her humiliated. Like she humiliated me." Back in the Carters' study, Alicia stood and walked to her desk. She picked up a framed photo, herself at law school graduation, standing alone. Her father hadn't been there. Her mother had passed away the year before. She'd achieved it all on her own. "David," she said suddenly, her voice stronger, "call Marcus at the foundation. Cancel my meetings for the next 3 days." David raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" "Naomi's right. No more hiding." Alicia's fingers traced the frame. "They want to talk about my father? Fine. Let's talk about how I put myself through school after he destroyed our family. Let's talk about the scholarship program I created for children of incarcerated parents." She turned to face her husband, her eyes now clear and determined. "And while we're at it, let's talk about Richard Harrington's real estate practices. How many families has he evicted illegally? How many discriminatory lending policies has he hidden?" "Now that's what I'm talking about," Naomi cheered through the phone. David stood, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I'll have our investigators pull everything we have on their operations." Alicia walked to her closet and pulled out the blue dress, the same one she'd worn the night of the slap. "If they want to make this about family legacies, let's do it. Let's see how the Harringtons handle their own dirty laundry being aired." She laid the dress out carefully, then turned back to David and Naomi. Her tears were gone, replaced by a fierce determination that made both of them straighten up. "They thought my father's story was their weapon," she said, her voice low and intense. "But they forgot something important. I've already lived through public shame. I've already rebuilt from nothing once." "The Harringtons?" She smiled, but it held no warmth. "They've never had to fight for anything in their lives." The next morning, Alicia sat in her home office, surrounded by stacks of property records and tenant complaints. Naomi perched on the edge of the desk, scrolling through her tablet while making notes. "Look at this pattern," Alicia said, spreading out several documents. "The Harrington Group buys historic buildings in minority neighborhoods, files for renovation permits, then suddenly all the long-term tenants face eviction notices." Naomi leaned in, frowning. "And let me guess, after the renovations, the rent triples?" Exactly. Alicia pulled up more files on her laptop. But here's where it gets interesting. The renovation permits all list the same contractor, Shell Corp Construction. I did some digging. It's a ghost company, registered to an empty office in Delaware. Money laundering? Naomi raised an eyebrow. Has to be. Alicia stood, pacing the room in her silk blouse and tailored pants. They're probably inflating renovation costs, pocketing the difference, and using it to dodge taxes. Naomi whistled low. Girl, this is dynamite. But we need more than paperwork. We need faces, stories, people willing to speak up. Already on it. Alicia picked up her phone, showing Naomi a long list of text messages. Remember Mrs. Johnson from the foundation? Her church group includes dozens of families affected by Harrington's schemes. They're ready to talk. Naomi's eyes lit up. And with your legal background, you can spot all the violations they tried to hide. Exactly. Alicia pulled up another document. Look at this eviction notice from last month. They claimed emergency repairs, but never filed proper permits. They gave the tenants 48 hours to leave. That's completely illegal in New York. They worked through lunch, ordering sandwiches that sat half-eaten as they dug deeper. By mid-afternoon, they had compiled a damning collection of evidence: forged inspection reports, discriminatory rental practices, and a clear pattern of targeting vulnerable communities. We need someone who knows how to package this, Naomi said, rubbing her tired eyes. Someone who can't be bought off or scared away. Alicia smiled. I know just the person. At 4 p.m., they met Marcus Green at a quiet coffee shop in Brooklyn, far from Manhattan's prying eyes. The veteran investigative journalist listened intently as Alicia laid out their findings, his weathered face growing more serious with each detail. This is systematic discrimination, Marcus said, examining the documents. And the money laundering angle? That could interest federal investigators. We have names, Alicia added. Dates, bank records, everything you need to start pulling threads. Marcus leaned back, studying her. You know they'll come at you harder when this drops. They'll say it's revenge for the slap. Try to discredit the whole investigation. Let them. Alicia's voice was steel. Everything here is documented. And unlike them, I'm not afraid of the truth. I'll need time to verify everything, Marcus said. Interview sources, cross-reference records. Maybe 2 weeks to do it right. Take what you need, Alicia replied. Just make sure it's bulletproof. After Marcus left, Naomi squeezed Alicia's hand. You okay? This is going to get ugly. I'm done being afraid. Alicia's eyes were clear and determined. They thought digging up my father would break me. But they forgot. I learned young how to spot criminals hiding behind respectability. They spent the rest of the afternoon organizing their findings, creating backup copies, and securing everything in a digital vault. As evening fell, Alicia sent Naomi home and waited for David to return from his meetings. She heard his key in the door just past 9. David found her in the study, still working at her computer. You've been busy, he said, loosening his tie and kissing her cheek. Alicia turned to face him, her expression both tired and triumphant. Remember when you said, the truth is stronger? Of course. She gestured to the files spread across her desk. I found their truth. All of it. The illegal evictions, the money laundering, the discrimination. Everything they've hidden for years. David picked up one of the documents, scanning it with growing interest. This is comprehensive. How did you— I was an attorney before I was your wife, she reminded him with a small smile. I know how to follow paper trails. And Naomi knows everyone in this city who's ever been wronged by the Harringtons. She stood, walking to the window. The city lights sparkled below, a constellation of human lives, including all those the Harringtons had carelessly damaged in their pursuit of profit. Marcus Green is going to break the story, she said quietly. He'll do it right. Make sure every claim is verified. When it hits, it won't just be about a socialite slapping me in a restaurant. It'll be about decades of systematic abuse of power. David came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. They tried to shame you with your father's crimes. Yes. Alicia turned in his embrace, her eyes fierce in the dim light. So I'll bury them with their own. They tried to shame me with the past. Her voice dropped to a whisper, heavy with determination. I'll bury them with the truth. The first story broke on a Tuesday morning. Harrington Empire, built on discrimination, blazed across the front page of the city's most respected newspaper. Marcus Green's meticulous investigation laid bare years of systematic abuse, complete with photographs, documents, and heartbreaking testimonials. Richard Harrington's phone started ringing at 6 a.m. By 7, his PR team was in crisis mode. By 8, 3 more major outlets had picked up the story, each adding new details and voices to the growing chorus of accusations. "They're lying!" Victoria screamed, throwing the newspaper across their marble-floored kitchen. "It's all lies, drummed up by that woman." Richard stood by the window, his face a mask of controlled fury as he scrolled through his phone. "Every single claim is documented, Victoria. That's the problem. They have the permits, the bank records, everything." Mrs. Chen, a 70-year-old grandmother, appeared on the morning news, describing how the Harrington Group had forced her family out of their home of 30 years. "They say repairs, but no repairs," she said, tears in her eyes. "Just want us gone because rich people moving in." The story spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with thousands sharing their own Harrington horror stories. Harrington evictions and donor justice for tenants started trending nationwide. Victoria's phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor Whitmore, her closest friend in Manhattan society. "So sorry, darling, but I'll have to cancel our lunch today. Something's come up." One by one, Victoria's carefully cultivated social circle began to distance themselves. Her regular tennis partners suddenly had scheduling conflicts. The charity board she chaired sent a polite email requesting her temporary resignation. "They can't do this to us," Victoria raged, pacing their penthouse in her designer heels. "We built this city. We gave them everything." Richard barely heard her. He was too busy calling in favors, pressing politicians he'd supported for years to help suppress the story. But his usual tactics weren't working. "I'm sorry, Richard," Senator Matthews said over the phone, his voice careful and distant. "This is too hot right now. I can't be seen interfering." By afternoon, more victims were coming forward. A group of black business owners described how the Harrington Group had systematically denied them commercial leases, even when they met all financial requirements. Former employees spoke about discriminatory hiring practices and hostile work environments. "They're vultures," Richard muttered, watching another news segment. Lying vultures looking for a payday. But he knew better. The evidence was too solid, too well documented. Marcus Green had done his homework, building an airtight case that was virtually lawsuit-proof. Victoria tried hosting an emergency lunch for her remaining social allies, but only 2 women showed up. Both left early, making thin excuses. "What's happening?" Victoria whispered, staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. "This isn't supposed to happen to people like us." The Harrington Group's stock price began to fall. Investors called emergency meetings. Partners and clients started quietly distancing themselves from ongoing projects. Richard worked the phones frantically, trying to maintain control. "Listen to me," he growled at his lawyer. "I don't care what it costs. Shut this down." But the lawyer's response was grim. "Richard, this isn't something we can make disappear. The evidence is too solid, and the public attention is too intense." By evening, more damaging details emerged. environmental violations, safety code breaches, systematic harassment of rent-controlled tenants. Each new revelation sparked fresh outrage. Victoria's social media accounts were flooded with angry messages. She deleted them all, but the comments kept coming. Former friends who had witnessed her casual racism over the years began sharing their own stories. "Remember when Victoria said that about the waitress at the benefit?" one socialite tweeted. "We all laughed it off then. Shame on us." Richard paced their penthouse, making call after call. But doors that had always been open were suddenly closed. Politicians wouldn't return his calls. Business partners sent messages through their lawyers. "This is that woman's doing," Victoria said, pouring herself another glass of wine. Her hands shook slightly. "That Alicia Carter. She planned this." "No," Richard said quietly, his face ashen. "She just exposed what was already there." The doorman called up to announce that reporters were gathering in the lobby. Camera crews stationed themselves outside the building. The Harringtons became prisoners in their own home, watching helplessly as their empire began to crumble. Late that evening, their private elevator opened. Richard's executive assistant stepped out, her face grave, holding a thick envelope. "This was just delivered to the office, Mr. Harrington," she said, extending the envelope with trembling hands. Richard took it, already knowing what it was. The paper felt heavy, official. Federal letterhead gleamed at the top. The subpoena landed on their glass dining table with a sharp crack. Victoria jumped at the sound, spilling her wine. "Richard!" Her voice was small, frightened. He stood there, hands pressed flat against the table, staring at the document that would begin their undoing. His face, usually flushed with power and confidence, had turned a sickly shade of pale. In the background, their massive television continued to broadcast the destruction of everything they'd built. More victims. More evidence. More truth. Richard's knuckles turned white against the glass table. All the power, all the connections, all the money in the world couldn't stop what was coming. The truth, once buried under layers of privilege and corruption, was finally breaking free. The courthouse steps looked like a battlefield. On one side, protesters held signs reading, "Justice for Mrs. Chen" and "Stop the Harrington Hate." On the other, a smaller group of wealthy supporters clutched "Stand with Victoria" placards. Police officers formed a barrier between them, their faces tense. Alicia Carter emerged from a black SUV, David's hand steady at her back. She wore the same blue dress from that fateful night at Leclerc's, perfectly tailored and radiating quiet defiance. The crowd's reaction was immediate. "We love you, Alicia!" someone shouted. Others took up the cry. Cameras flashed in a strobing frenzy. Reporters thrust microphones forward, but Alicia moved with practiced grace, her head high. David's security team formed a protective circle around them. "Mrs. Carter, how do you feel about today's hearing? Any comment on the Harrington corruption allegations?" She didn't respond, but her expression spoke volumes. Calm, determined, unafraid. Minutes later, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up. Victoria Harrington stepped out first, her designer suit pristine, but her face drawn. Richard followed, his usual commanding presence diminished by weeks of scandal and stress. Their lawyers clustered around them like a shield. "Criminals!" someone yelled. "Give Mrs. Chen her home back!" Victoria flinched. Richard's face darkened with rage as he pushed through the crowd. Inside the courtroom, Judge Evelyn Monroe surveyed the packed gallery with stern authority. Her reputation for fairness and zero tolerance for theatrics was legendary. "This hearing will come to order," she announced, her voice cutting through the tension. "Any disruptions will result in immediate removal." Alicia sat at the plaintiff's table, her posture perfect. David squeezed her hand once before taking his seat in the front row. Across the aisle, the Harringtons huddled with their legal team, Richard whispering furiously to his lead attorney. "Mrs. Carter," Judge Monroe said, "you may take the stand." Alicia rose gracefully, the blue dress catching the harsh fluorescent light. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore her oath, and settled into the witness chair. "Please describe the events of April 15th at LeClaire's restaurant," her lawyer prompted. Alicia's voice was clear and steady. "I was having dinner with my friend Naomi. We were celebrating her promotion." She described the wine mix-up, Victoria's escalating behavior, and finally, the slap. The sound echoed through the restaurant. Everyone went silent. "And why do you believe Mrs. Harrington acted this way?" "Objection," Richard's lawyer stood. "Speculation." "I'll rephrase," Alicia's attorney said smoothly. "Mrs. Carter, what did Mrs. Harrington say to you before and after the assault?" Alicia's composure never wavered. "She said I didn't belong there, that people like me were trying to take what wasn't ours. She assumed, based on my race, that I couldn't possibly be a legitimate patron." Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Several jurors took notes. "During our investigation," Alicia's lawyer continued, "we uncovered a pattern of similar behavior in the Harrington Group's business practices. Can you elaborate?" "Objection!" Richard's attorney practically shouted. "Beyond the scope." "Your Honor," Alicia's lawyer countered, "this goes to establishing a pattern of discriminatory behavior and malicious intent." Judge Monroe leaned forward. "I'll allow it, but tread carefully." Alicia detailed the evidence they'd gathered: displaced families, rejected applications, internal emails showing explicit bias. Her legal background shone through as she broke down complex issues into clear, damning points. Richard's face grew redder with each word. His fingers dug into the table's edge. Mrs. Harrington's actions that night weren't isolated, Alicia concluded. They were a public display of the same prejudice that has guided their business practices for years. Victoria's lawyer began an aggressive cross-examination, trying to paint Alicia as an opportunist exploiting a minor incident. "Isn't it true your father served time for fraud?" he demanded. "Yes," Alicia answered calmly. "My father made mistakes he deeply regrets. But I fail to see how his actions relate to your client assaulting me or systematically discriminating against minorities." Richard suddenly stood up, his control finally snapping. "This is ridiculous. We built this city. We provided jobs. How dare you sit there in your perfect dress and judge us?" "Mr. Harrington," Judge Monroe's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Sit down immediately." But Richard was too far gone. "You have no right. None of you have any right. Do you know who I am? Mr. Harrington, this is your final warning. One more outburst and you'll be held in contempt." Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing his red-faced fury. Victoria tugged at his sleeve, whispering urgently, but he shook her off. "This court is a joke. She's turned this into a circus, and you're all falling for it." "Bailiff!" Judge Monroe's voice cut through his tirade. "Remove Mr. Harrington from my courtroom. He will be held in contempt." As security approached, Richard knocked over his chair, pointing at Alicia. "You think you've won? You think this makes you better than us?" Alicia didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still, her blue dress a calm center in the chaos, watching as Richard Harrington, self-proclaimed king of Manhattan real estate, was led away in handcuffs. The courtroom buzzed with shocked whispers. Reporters scribbled frantically. Victoria sat alone at her table, her carefully maintained facade crumbling as she watched her husband's meltdown being broadcast live across every major network. Judge Monroe restored order with another sharp crack of her gavel. "We will take a 15-minute recess. When we return, I expect absolute decorum from everyone present." "Is that understood?" The gallery emptied quickly, reporters rushing to file their stories. Outside, the crowd had grown even larger, their chants echoing through the courthouse halls. Justice! 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 Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun beat down on a scene of mounting tension. Police officers in riot gear formed lines between the two groups of protesters, their shields gleaming. The chants from both sides grew louder, more aggressive. "Justice for Alicia!" roared one side. "Stand with Victoria!" countered the other, though their numbers had dwindled significantly since the morning. Alicia and David emerged from the courthouse doors, their fingers intertwined. Her blue dress caught the sunlight, making her look almost ethereal against the gray stone building. Security guards flanked them, eyes scanning the crowd constantly. "Mrs. Carter! Mr. Carter!" Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward. "Any comment on Richard Harrington's outburst?" Before they could respond, a water bottle sailed through the air from the Harrington supporters' side. It missed Alicia, but sparked immediate chaos. The two groups surged forward, colliding against the police line. "Back up! Everyone back up!" officers shouted, their radios crackling with calls for backup. David pulled Alicia closer, but she remained remarkably composed. Their security team quickly guided them toward their waiting vehicle, even as shoving matches broke out around them. "Racist trash!" someone screamed at the Harrington supporters. "Liberal mob!" came the reply. Signs splintered as they were used as makeshift weapons. A young man in an expensive suit threw a punch at a woman holding a "Justice for Mrs. Chen" poster. Police moved in swiftly, separating fighters and making arrests. Through it all, Alicia and David walked with dignity, their calm presence a stark contrast to the mayhem. Phones captured their poised exit, footage that would soon go viral as a symbol of grace under pressure. Inside their SUV, Alicia finally let out a shaky breath. "I never wanted violence," she said softly. David squeezed her hand. "This isn't your fault. The truth always brings out strong reactions." Across town, Victoria Harrington sat in her penthouse, watching the chaos unfold on multiple news channels. Her PR team huddled around her, pushing her toward an immediate response. "You need to get ahead of this," her media consultant insisted. "Richard's outburst is trending everywhere. We need damage control now." Victoria nodded, her usual perfect posture slightly slumped. Within minutes, she was seated for a live interview with News Now Network. "Mrs. Harrington, thank you for joining us," the anchor began. "Would you like to address today's events?" Victoria tried to smile, but it came across as strained. "Yes, thank you for having me. First, I want to apologize to Mrs. Carter for any distress I may have caused." The anchor leaned forward. "Any distress you may have caused?" "Yes, well," Victoria shifted uncomfortably. "I think this whole situation has been blown wildly out of proportion by social media and cancel culture. One small misunderstanding has been twisted into something ugly by people with agendas." The anchor's expression hardened. "Mrs. Harrington, video clearly shows you slapping Mrs. Carter unprovoked. How is that a small misunderstanding?" "You weren't there." Victoria's voice took on a defensive edge. "The atmosphere that night was very tense. And now, suddenly, we're being portrayed as monsters? Our company has employed thousands of people over the years. Where's the gratitude?" Social media exploded instantly. "Victoria Harrington is over" party started trending. Clips of her interview were shared millions of times, each with more scathing commentary than the last. Did she really just demand gratitude? Notice how she still can't admit she was wrong? Typical racist non-apology. In Alicia and David's penthouse, Naomi arrived with takeout and wine. The three of them watched Victoria's interview together in the comfortable media room. "Oh my God!" Naomi exclaimed, nearly spilling her wine. "Is she seriously playing the victim right now?" Alicia shook her head slowly. still wearing the blue dress that had become a symbol of resistance. She still doesn't get it, but the world does. Look at these comments. Naomi scrolled through her phone. People are sharing stories about similar experiences they've had with wealthy racists. You've started a movement, Alicia. I never wanted to start a movement, Alicia said quietly. I just wanted to be treated with basic human dignity. Sometimes that's exactly what starts movements, David added, his arm around her shoulders. On screen, Victoria's interview continued to play out like a masterclass in privilege and tone deafness. She complained about mob mentality while defending her husband's courtroom outburst as understandable frustration. The real victims here are the Harrington Group employees, whose jobs are at risk because of this witch hunt, Victoria declared, her voice rising. Where's the social justice warriors' concern for them? Naomi threw a pillow at the TV. Is she kidding? After what they did to Mrs. Chen and all those other families? The news cut to footage of elderly Mrs. Chen, speaking through tears about how the Harringtons had illegally evicted her from her home of 30 years. The contrast between her genuine pain and Victoria's manufactured victimhood was stark. She's done, David said firmly. They both are. The world has changed, and they can't adapt because they don't want to admit they were wrong in the first place. Alicia reached for her wine glass, her hand steady. You know what's ironic? If she had simply apologized that night at Leclerc's, really apologized, this might have ended differently. Proud people would rather lose everything than admit they're wrong, Naomi observed, checking her phone again. Oh wow, major companies are already releasing statements, cutting ties with Harrington Group. The empire is crumbling in real time. They watched as more news poured in. Investors pulling out, board members resigning, social clubs revoking memberships. Victoria Harrington's non-apology had become the final nail in her family's social coffin. The morning sun cast long shadows across Manhattan as federal agents swarmed the Harrington Group headquarters. Through the glass-walled lobby, employees watched in shock as investigators carried out boxes of documents and hard drives. In a downtown conference room, District Attorney Sarah Martinez stood before a wall of reporters, pointing to a screen filled with damning financial records. The evidence shows a clear pattern of fraud, money laundering, and discriminatory housing practices spanning 2 decades, she announced, her voice firm. The Harrington Group systematically targeted minority communities for illegal evictions while falsifying property records to hide their actions. Alicia and David sat in the front row, their presence commanding attention. She wore a simple white blazer today, her expression solemn as the evidence mounted. David held her hand, his jaw tight as he watched years of corruption exposed. Furthermore, Martinez continued, we've uncovered offshore accounts containing millions in embezzled funds. Multiple properties were purchased using laundered money from questionable sources. Screens displayed complex financial diagrams showing how money flowed through shell companies and fake charities. Several of Victoria's prestigious philanthropic organizations were revealed to be fronts for tax evasion. My God, whispered a reporter nearby. They were running a criminal enterprise in plain sight. At Harrington Group headquarters, Richard paced his corner office, watching his empire implode on multiple news channels. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from panicked investors and board members jumping ship. Mr. Harrington, his assistant's voice trembled through the intercom. Morgan Stanley is terminating all relationships with the company, effective immediately. And the board has called an emergency meeting to vote on your removal. Richard slammed his fist on his desk. Tell them they can't do this. I built this company. Sir, they've already voted. It was unanimous. Victoria burst into his office, her designer outfit disheveled, her eyes wild. Richard, please, just stop fighting. Admit what we did. Maybe they'll show mercy. Mercy? Richard spun toward her, face red. You want me to beg for mercy from them? After everything we've built? Everything we've built is gone. Victoria's voice cracked. Our friends won't take my calls. The country club revoked our membership. Even our children won't speak to us. Back at the press conference, Martinez displayed photographs of tearful families being forced from their homes. Mrs. Chen's story appeared again. The elderly woman who had lived in her apartment for 30 years before the Harringtons illegally evicted her to build luxury condos. The human cost of the Harringtons' greed cannot be measured in dollars, Martinez declared. These were people's lives they destroyed. Alicia stood up, approaching the podium when invited. Her voice was clear and strong. This was never about just a slap in a restaurant. That moment simply exposed a deeper rot. The kind of casual cruelty that happens every day to people who can't fight back. Today, we're fighting back for all of them. The room erupted in applause. David watched his wife with pride, remembering how she'd once worried her past would define her. Now she stood as a symbol of justice. At Harrington headquarters, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Stock prices plummeted. Major clients publicly severed ties. Banks froze accounts as investigations widened. Richard's secretary quit on the spot when federal agents arrived on their floor. Victoria sat crumpled in a leather chair, watching her husband unravel as he tried to delete files and shred documents. "It's over," she whispered. "Richard, please. They're coming." "Nothing's over," he shouted, but his hands shook as he fumbled with papers. "I still have connections. I can still fix this." "Fix what?" Victoria stood suddenly, her voice sharp. "Our reputation is destroyed. Our friends have abandoned us. Our own children won't defend us. And it's all because we couldn't admit we were wrong." Richard whirled on her. "This is your fault. If you hadn't slapped that woman—" "No!" Victoria's scream surprised them both. "Don't you dare blame me alone. We've both been horrible people. We've hurt so many families. And for what? More money we didn't need?" Heavy footsteps approached down the hallway. Agents' voices echoed, getting closer. "Richard Harrington!" a commanding voice called out. "This is the FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest." Victoria watched as her husband's face crumpled, reality finally breaking through his denial. He looked suddenly old, defeated. The door burst open, agents flooding in with weapons drawn. "Richard Harrington, you're under arrest for fraud, money laundering, and multiple violations of federal housing laws," an agent announced, producing handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." Reporters had somehow made it up to the office floor, cameras flashing as Richard was led out in handcuffs. His perfectly tailored suit looked wrinkled now, his carefully maintained image shattered. Victoria stood alone by the window, surrounded by clicking cameras and shouted questions. Below, she could see news vans filling the street, their satellite dishes reaching up like accusing fingers. "Mrs. Harrington, do you have any comment? Did you know about the fraud? What do you say to the families you evicted?" She turned away from their questions, staring at the city beyond. Somewhere out there, Alicia Carter was probably watching this unfold. Victoria thought about that night at Leclerc's, how different things might have been if she'd simply treated another human being with dignity. "Mrs. Harrington," the questions continued, "what will you do now?" She had no answer. For the first time in her life, Victoria Harrington had no power, no influence, and nowhere to hide from the truth about herself. The evening light bathed Leclerc's in a warm golden glow as Alicia and David Carter stepped out of their car. The restaurant's exterior hadn't changed, but everything else had. Television crews lined the sidewalk, their cameras tracking the couple's every move. Alicia wore a new blue dress, similar to but different from the one she'd worn that fateful night. David looked sharp in a charcoal suit, his hand steady at the small of her back as they approached the entrance. The maitre d' opened the doors with a flourish. "Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Carter." Inside, the restaurant erupted in applause. Diners stood at their tables, servers paused with their trays, and even the kitchen staff peered through the service doors to catch a glimpse. The sound was deafening, filled with genuine warmth and respect. Naomi rushed forward to embrace her friend, wearing a stunning red dress and the biggest smile Alicia had ever seen. "Look at you," she whispered in Alicia's ear. "You're glowing." They made their way through the dining room, past the very spot where Victoria had delivered that infamous slap. Someone had placed a small brass plaque on the floor. "Standing up starts here. June 15th, 2023. Your usual table, Mrs. Carter?" the maitre d' asked, gesturing to their favorite corner spot. "Actually," Alicia said, her voice carrying clearly through the now quiet room, "I'd like to stand right here for a moment, if that's okay." She turned to face the crowd, David's hand finding hers. The restaurant had been closed to regular reservations for this private event, filled instead with community leaders, activists, and many of the families who had come forward with stories about the Harringtons' predatory practices. Mrs. Chen sat near the front, the elderly woman's eyes bright with tears of joy. Next to her was Marcus Thompson, a small business owner who had nearly lost everything to one of Richard's schemes. They represented just a fraction of the lives touched by this story. 3 months ago, Alicia began, her voice steady and strong, I stood in this exact spot and felt the sting of hatred. A woman looked at me and decided I didn't belong. She thought her money and her status gave her the right to put me in my place. Murmurs of anger rippled through the crowd, but Alicia raised her hand gently. But that slap didn't diminish me. It didn't define me. Instead, it exposed a truth that needed to be told. It started a conversation that needed to be had. And most importantly, it brought all of us together. David squeezed her hand, his eyes shining with pride. Look around this room, Alicia continued. I see people from every background, every neighborhood in this city. I see strength. I see dignity. I see a community that refused to let hatred win. Naomi dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, careful not to smudge her makeup. She'd been there from the beginning, never wavering in her support. To the staff here at Leclerc's, who stood up for me that night, thank you. To the countless strangers who shared their stories and supported us, thank you. To every person who chose truth over comfort, justice over convenience, thank you. The head waiter, who had been working the night of the incident, raised his glass. Others followed suit, a forest of crystal catching the light. But this isn't just about me. Alicia's voice grew passionate. This is about every person who's ever been told they don't belong. Every family that's been pushed out of their home. Every individual who's faced discrimination and thought they had to accept it. She gestured to Mrs. Chen. This is about people like Mrs. Chen, who fought for 30 years to keep her home. And now, thanks to the settlement, she'll not only keep it, she'll help other families do the same through the housing assistance program we're launching next month. More applause broke out. Mrs. Chen beamed, clutching her handbag with pride. The Harringtons thought they could silence us with money, with threats, with shame. But they learned what so many others need to learn, that dignity cannot be slapped away, that justice may be slow, but it is unstoppable when we stand together. Naomi stepped forward, raising her champagne glass. To Alicia Carter, she called out, her voice ringing with emotion. The woman who turned a slap into a revolution. To Alicia, the crowd echoed, glasses lifting high. David pulled his wife close, pressing a kiss to her temple. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment, but Alicia barely noticed them anymore. She was too busy watching the faces around her. Proud faces, determined faces, faces full of hope and vindication. A server appeared with champagne for Alicia and David. The bubbles danced in their glasses, catching the light like tiny stars. To all of you, Alicia raised her glass. To dignity, to justice, to standing up. The crystal glasses clinked together, their sound like music. Alicia leaned into David's embrace, finally feeling complete peace settle over her. The nightmare was over. The truth had won. And in this room full of allies and friends, she was exactly where she belonged. Mrs. Chen approached slowly, her small frame straight with dignity. "You show them," she said simply, patting Alicia's hand. "You show them we are strong." Alicia smiled, cameras catching the genuine warmth of the moment. She and David stood together, their fingers intertwined, as more well-wishers approached to share their stories and gratitude. The flashing cameras captured it all: the triumph, the joy, the sense of community. But most importantly, they captured the quiet strength in Alicia's smile as she held David's hand, finally at peace in the very spot where their battle for justice had begun. The grand ballroom of the former Harrington Plaza, now renamed Unity Center, sparkled under crystal chandeliers. Where stuffy charity galas once hosted Manhattan's elite, tonight's crowd represented the true heart of the city. Senior citizens chatted with young activists, working families mingled with community leaders, and children darted between tables decorated with blue and silver centerpieces. Alicia stood at the entrance, greeting each guest personally. She wore a simple cream-colored dress tonight, letting another blue dress take center stage, the one displayed in a glass case near the podium, illuminated like a piece of art. "Can you believe this used to be Richard's favorite showing-off spot?" Naomi whispered, appearing at Alicia's side. "Now look at it. Actually doing some good for once." Mrs. Chen walked past with her granddaughter, both wearing "Housing Justice Now" pins. The elderly woman had become something of a celebrity in her own right, her decades-long fight against the Harringtons' eviction attempts now a rallying cry for tenant rights. "Mrs. Carter!" A group of teenage girls approached, their phones clutched hopefully. "Could we get a picture?" "Of course," Alicia smiled warmly. "But please, call me Alicia." David watched from across the room, pride evident in his expression as he discussed the new housing initiative with community leaders. The Carter Foundation had already committed to converting 3 former Harrington properties into affordable housing, with more projects in the pipeline. "Look at this turnout," Naomi gestured at the packed ballroom. "We had to close registration last week. People were still begging for tickets." A local news crew set up their equipment near the stage. The reporter, Sandra Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, had covered the story from the beginning. She'd been one of the few journalists who hadn't wavered when the Harringtons tried to spin their narrative. "Mrs. Carter," Sandra approached with her microphone. "Would you mind a quick word about tonight's event?" "Please," Alicia gestured to a quiet corner. "And thank you again for your fair coverage throughout everything." "Truth is its own defense," Sandra replied. "Ready when you are." The camera's red light blinked on, and Sandra began. "I'm here with Alicia Carter at tonight's Housing Justice Initiative launch. Mrs. Carter, this building held very different events just months ago. How does it feel to transform it into a community space?" "It feels right," Alicia answered, her voice clear and confident. "This space, like so many others, was built on the backs of hardworking people who were then shut out of it. Tonight, we're opening the doors wide. We're saying everyone belongs." A burst of laughter drew their attention to where David was showing a group of kids how to tie proper bow ties. The children giggled as they tangled the silk strips, their parents watching with grateful smiles. Your blue dress has become quite a symbol. Sandra nodded toward the display. There's even talk of it being featured in the Civil Rights Museum's modern exhibit. Naomi, who had drifted over to listen, chuckled. I told her we should frame it. Guess I wasn't thinking big enough. The dress itself isn't important, Alicia said thoughtfully. What matters is what it represents. Every person who's ever been told they don't belong, every family fighting to keep their home, every individual standing up against injustice, that's what it symbolizes. The interview wrapped up just as the formal program was about to begin. David made his way to the stage, his presence commanding immediate attention from the crowd. Welcome, everyone, he began, his deep voice carrying easily through the ballroom. Tonight marks the beginning of something extraordinary. But before we detail our initiatives, I'd like to introduce someone who turned a moment of hatred into a movement of hope. My wife, Alicia Carter. The applause was thunderous as Alicia ascended the steps. She passed the illuminated blue dress, its fabric catching the light like a beacon. 3 months ago, she began, a woman looked at me and decided I didn't deserve to exist in her space. She thought her wealth gave her the right to determine who belongs and who doesn't. Alicia paused, surveying the diverse crowd before her. She was wrong. Not just about me, but about every person she and her husband tried to bully, evict, or silence. Mrs. Chen nodded vigorously from her seat, surrounded by other former Harrington tenants who had fought eviction. Tonight, we're not just launching housing initiatives, Alicia continued. We're declaring that everyone deserves dignity. Everyone deserves a home. Everyone deserves to belong. David joined her at the podium, their hands finding each other naturally. The crowd rose to their feet, applause mixing with cheers and a few happy tears. Look at this room, Alicia spoke softly to David, though the microphone carried her words. They tried to destroy us, but we built something greater. The cheering grew louder. Naomi wiped tears from her eyes, careful not to smudge her mascara. Mrs. Chen hugged her granddaughter. Young activists high-fived senior citizens. Children waved their proudly crooked bow ties. Camera flashes captured it all. The joy, the triumph, the sense of community that filled every corner of the transformed space. The blue dress stood in its case, no longer a reminder of humiliation, but a symbol of victory, of justice served, of dignity preserved. The applause continued, washing over Alicia and David as they stood together at the podium. Their victory complete, not just in defeating the Harringtons, but in building something meaningful from the ashes of their empire. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.